Hi, everybody. This is Wayne Sadin. Let me start with some housekeeping. We're recording this session. The recording will be shared following the webinar, so don't worry. You don't have to take notes about everything. We'd much rather you focused on what the experts are saying and think about questions you'd really like answered. We'll take the questions at the end of the presentation, get as many of them answered as we can. Please use the Q&A button to ask questions during the presentation. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Wayne Sadin. For 30 years, I was a CIO, CTO, and CDO in a variety of industries, from energy to financial services to logistics to healthcare. For the last 10 years, I've been an advisor to boards and C-suites, helping them use technology more effectively, digital transformation, digital optimization. For about the last 4 years, I focused on the cloud, writing with a group called Cloud Wars. And then for the last year, I've been also working with Acceleration Economy, which just had a major cloud conference in San Francisco, California. I am a fan of the cloud, but I'm not the expert in Atlassian Tools. The experts are with me now, and let me start by letting them introduce themselves. Paul, would you like to start?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wayne. I'm excited to join this group of experts today. Hi, I'm Paul Lechner. So I've been working in technology for the last 20 years with a focus on product management and leadership across diverse industries, from cybersecurity to ad tech to collaboration tools. And my most recent role is the AVP of product management at Appfire, where I lead the marketplace apps. Appfire is the largest marketplace vendor for Atlassian.
That's terrific, Paul. Rodney, how about you go next?
Oh, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, my name is Rodney West. I'm a senior professional services lead at ISOS Technology. I've been with ISOS for 15 years and have been a consultant in the technology professional services space for over 20. And that's, my current focus is on a lot of the Atlassian space as far as migrations and implementations, helping our clients actually get the most out of the tools that they can.
Thank you very much, Rodney. Dave, last but not least, Dave from Atlassian.
Hey, greetings all. My name is Dave Hebner. I'm a solutions engineer specializing in cloud migrations here at Atlassian. Like my colleagues here, I've spent about 20 years in technology as well, with really kind of the last almost dozen years helping organizations take advantage of the cloud. And you'll notice that I've been doing cloud since before cloud was a thing. More or less. So I look forward to the conversation here with everybody.
That's terrific, Dave. So now that we've introduced the experts, let me turn it back to Rodney and Dave to give us a little bit of insight into their companies and to what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so ISOS Technology, we're a platinum partner for Atlassian for providing services. We've actually been using Atlassian tools prior to actually providing services for them whenever we were just doing pure technical consulting. And as I said a moment ago, and I introduced myself, actually involved in migrations and implementations, basically in all stages of your life cycle with Atlassian tools. And that's effectively kind of what we do. We've had a lot of focus in the last couple of years with getting people migrated to the cloud, with that shift and with the maturation of the cloud as an actual really a strong platform for providing services.
Thank you, Rodney. Dave, let's talk about Atlassian's view of the cloud.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would assume that most of the folks that are here are at least familiar with, if not users of Atlassian tools. And as you know, we have quite a broad portfolio of tools. From our perspective, really, and it fits nicely with the title of this webinar, is the cloud is certainly now, and we've really put our investments behind that statement. We do invest heavily, and we are investing heavily in the cloud, all of our platforms, with really the focus on innovation and growth in our cloud products, right? And so you'll see that in the roadmap, you'll see that in the results that we have. And we see that move to the cloud really quickly, kind of coming back to the most important assets that we all have as companies, and that's the people, and how are we able to remove some of those tedious things that those folks are doing. How can we help teams move faster to innovate and really to focus on what matters most? right? So the cloud allows us to do all that, and we're investing. You'll see our investments are really heavily there in the cloud.
Well, Dave, it's terrific that Atlassian is investing in the cloud. Lots of your customers clearly are investing. And it's good to see that Atlassian is right up there with the customers and maybe even a little ahead of some. So let's get back to why we're here. The cloud is now, if you're an Atlassian customer, a little bit more focused. If you're an Atlassian server product family customer, you're facing an end of life in about 2 years, actually a little less than 2 years, February of 2024, about 18 months from now, Atlassian is discontinuing the support for the server product. And so that's not very far away. And we're here to discuss the pros, the cons, the migration path, and what you can expect as a cloud customer of Atlassian's. So first, we're going to talk about what are your options between now and 2024. Paul, would you please start by giving us some of the options?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Wayne. So, I mean, just because cloud is now, it doesn't mean you have to be in the cloud right now. So there are various options, but we do need to keep in mind that if you are a server customer, as Wayne said, there is that date hanging out there in the future of February 2024. And so some of the various options are, say, one, move cloud now. Look at planning that switch right now as soon as possible. Start to build your plans, work with solution partners if you're a more complex customer that needs some help along the way. Other things that you could do is think about, okay, let's kick the can down the road. We'll wait and do it as soon as I get closer to that February 2024 date. And that's as long as possible, versus as soon as possible. And in that case, we need to still think about when that date comes up. We can't just wait to the last minute. You need to ensure that you're starting to do that planning, working with a solution partner. They're starting to schedule their migrations with their customers now. So make sure you get on that list. But I think for a lot of customers, they probably will take more of a hybrid approach, meaning, okay, can I move some of my data right now to the cloud? Maybe those are simpler migrations. Maybe I take one department or one location and test out the cloud now. Looking at sort of those less complex migrations, that means I can take less risk. I might be able to do it faster, and then move more of that data as time goes on. Of course, you need to think about all the planning that goes into it, the migration testing, of course, the training that comes into that. Another option is the data center option. So Atlassian has a data center option, meaning if you're on server and you still need to maintain your data, either in your own data centers or in your private cloud, you can move over to data center. The only disadvantage there is that, of course, you're not going to start to take advantage of some of those efficiencies that come with the cloud, such as having a common authorization system, having common security, not having to worry about all of those patches and various pieces that go into maintaining your own infrastructure. And then, of course, if you're stubborn, you could wait and keep your server instance. It is perpetual. But of course, there are risks around that. Risks like getting behind in terms of tech debt, patches not coming out, because of course, Atlassian's not going to be supporting server past that February 2024 date.
Thank you, Paul. Rodney, your organization is doing a lot with Atlassian in the current product family and in the cloud. Why don't you give us your perspective?
And so my perspective, it really kind of mirrors what Paul is saying. That's what we're seeing whenever organizations are considering what they want to do for moving. But I think one of the key things that people need to do, regardless of where you may fall on scale, is you need to start assessing now what path you want to take, right? I mean, basically, we've got effectively a year and a half before that end of life. It's going to take a little bit for assessments to actually get the right partner to help you through and to actually perform the migration. So, if you go, I'm going to wait another 6 months and then look into this, that's really going to put you behind the 8 ball. So really kind of the key thing right now is get somebody in to actually start an assessment for you to look and see, okay, what features are going to move to the cloud? What may be a better fit for data center, right? So you need to do kind of a comparison of where you want to go and where you are now and get that path defined. And that's something you actually need to jump on, as soon as possible, because like I said, a year and a half is not a long time in basically the life cycle we see for migrations.
And let me echo what Paul and Rodney said. 30 years as a CIO, if my team came and said, we have an end of life in mid-February, I would say, be ready in January. Then I'd say, wait a minute, January is the first month of the year. I don't want to be doing major changes in January. In fact, most organizations don't like to do major changes after perhaps US Thanksgiving. So that means it's not 18 months, it's maybe 15 months, maybe 14, depending on your risk appetite. So the time to be assessing is now. Maybe you'll realize that you have plenty of time because your organization is smaller or simpler. Maybe you'll discover you really are behind the 8 ball and you have to crash a schedule. So I also want to comment, because I have an opinion on technical debt. If you're interested, read the stuff I've been writing for 4 years on this. You don't want technical debt. You might say, but the Atlassian software is pretty good. It doesn't break. What do I care? Well, you know what? That Atlassian server software lives within an ecosystem. So let's say that your hardware team has to put a firmware patch on a server, and all of a sudden it breaks something in the operating system, and now the server has to be upgraded. That's a problem. What if a 0-day defect is found on the virus side and they've got to put a patch on, and it's incompatible, not with the Atlassian software potentially, but some of the many support products that you have to put on that server. So for a product as important as the Atlassian server products, you do not want to be waiting and get behind the technical debt 8 ball. It's a very good way to get yourself in trouble, really. Okay, so now that we understand the basic problem, let's do risks and benefits. Obviously, that's something you all want to know. So let's start with talking about the risks. I'm a pessimist, so we'll talk about risks first. And Rodney, you've been picked as Mr. Pessimism, so give us the risks of playing.
Hey, hopefully that does not stick as a new Slack handle for me. That's what I'm going to lead off with here. But but to the point here, it is actually important to look at the negative sides whenever you're actually considering anything, because and for that case, you don't want to find yourself in a hole. So what I mentioned previously, I'm going to kind of hammer again, is you want to be careful not to actually miss that end of life date, right? So, waiting too long, as Wayne said, I said a year and a half, but he's completely right. We see things start to really, like, you don't have the teams on the client side available to actually support migrations, after those Thanksgiving dates a lot of time. So yeah, you actually are in a more compressed time frame than even an 18 month. You want to make sure you're not going to miss that window. And there's 2 parts there. There's the part where the server goes end of life and you miss that window. But the second part is these migrations are very complex. Mapping them out, figuring out what it's going to take, and actually working through the process and doing your rehearsal, and multiple UAT cycles, that you need to actually do to get the migration to happen properly. Those are very time consuming, and they require people with expertise in the tooling. You're going to want an Atlassian solution partner for this. The longer you wait, the smaller that bucket of solution partners is going to be that actually have the availability to move you within a time frame that fits your needs. So really, those are kind of a couple of the, what I see as risks as far as waiting too long is, missing that end of life and finding yourself with a migration that definitely can't happen at the time, and not being able to find the resources to actually help you as part of that migration. So I think those are 2 actually very important risks to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Vital risks to keep in mind. But you know what? It's not just risk avoidance. There are benefits to moving to the cloud sooner. So Paul, why don't you cover the benefits for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something to point out in terms of the potential benefits is looking at the costs that these benefits could overcome. So if you think about maintaining a server instance or a data center instance, there are certain costs that are associated with that. So for example, if you need to maintain your own hardware, there is specific software you need to maintain, you have patch upgrades, release cycles, you need to have specialized staff and labor, people that are experts at security, authorization, load balancing, network optimization. All of these have a cost. So, there's various statistics out there, but for example, Forrester talks about saving costs for specialized labor can reduce your cost of up to 20%. So those are some of the costs that you would avoid, but also as you move to cloud sooner. So Atlassian is focusing on a cloud first mentality. And so there are certain advantages such as new features being introduced in cloud only. We're thinking about that at Appfire as well, as like as we introduce new apps that support Atlassian apps, that we introduce the additional functionality around security and whatever it may be in the cloud first. So you'll be able to take advantage of some of those new features and functionality that may not be available in server or DC.
Right.
Dave, what's the Atlassian perspective?
I was just going to jump on that because I hear costs, and so there are other costs to consider, and those are the potential discounts that you can get through Atlassian, through your partners for the licensing fee, right? So there are loyalty discounts or things like that to consider, and those don't live around forever. So it's certainly something to consider as well.
Absolutely. So we got the cost, we got the benefits. What are best practices when moving to the cloud, and how do you and the partners ensure that your migration will be smooth? Rodney, we let you say something positive now. So why don't you talk about that?
Yes. And so one of the biggest things that I see as kind of the key, and it's foundational for your migration, is investment in your assessment phase. Yeah, that doesn't give you, the bells and whistles. Oh, we're migrated and people are able to see the new instance. But really what you need to do is invest that time in finding out what you're using in the tool. What are your business critical features? And talking across your organization, because what the IT team thinks is business critical may be very different than what HR thinks is critical, and what legal and marketing. So you need to reach that consensus early, as far as figuring out what you need in the migration. So it's figuring out where you are now, figuring out where you need to go, and figuring out that path. That is, that's your essential, iceberg under the water piece. And, people may not want to focus on it because it's not as exciting as the actual migration, but it's actually, I would say, probably foundationally more important than the migration itself, because this will also tell you whether cloud is right for you, or whether data centers where you want to go, or what your actual solution may be, the hybrid paths that Paul talked about as well. So it's the foundational piece that you hit that right away. I can't overstress enough. Make sure to invest in that assessment phase.
Yeah, and I just have to reinforce that. He spot on. And I've seen from the Atlassian standpoint, I see migrations that have partners involved, partners that don't. Most of my experience across our largest customer base, and whether you're the largest customer with 35 different Confluence instances that need to be moved, or you just are a one-person shop, assessing as soon as possible could not be more critical. Anytime that there's been a hiccup, it's because the assessment phase wasn't done properly. We didn't invest enough in it, and it is an investment, and I just can't speak to it enough. It's absolutely crucial, and it can be fun. Come on, Rodney.
Well, it's fun to learn all the things you put into the code that now maybe you can take out, because there are things being done in the cloud product. And that's what we'll talk about next. And we talked about risks and benefits. Let's talk about some of the cloud features. So the question I'll ask the panelists is, how do you take advantage of the investment Atlassian has been making for the last 2 years in the cloud? How do you keep up with innovation? How do you stay competitive? Paul, why don't you try that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, man, I think something to think about as we plan our migrations is to think about, how are you doing it? Are you doing it as a full migration or as a partial migration? And that speaks back to some of the pieces I talked about before, where you may be moving some of your data over time, and you really need to plan for that. And so you can take advantage of some of the tools that are available either through Appfire, for example, as a vendor, or through Atlassian. And this will help you to consider, am I going to lift and shift all of my data into my cloud instance right now? That would be a full migration. Maybe it's a partial migration, thinking about, okay, I'm going to move some of my projects over time. And so there's lots of planning tools, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this webinar, but about some of the tools that will help you to assess that readiness and analyze the migration and ensure that you do that in a very smooth manner.
Terrific. And now, Dave, why don't you tell the audience, since we're in an increasingly mobile world, how does Atlassian build tools to let you, the customer, empower your mobile workforce?
Yeah, great. Be happy to. So it really all comes back to the Atlassian Cloud architecture, right? Core of it is really the ability to leverage and take advantage of all of the investment that we have made enterprise-wide into security, into compliance, and let us handle that, right? So by having Atlassian upfront in our architecture secure that for you, you then don't have to worry about opening a VPN back into maybe a Confluence server in order to have your mobile workforce out there looking at it through a web browser. Or worst case, opening a port, which we'd never probably want to do anyways, opening a port back into that, right? So those tedious, mundane things that open up your system to risks, right? Those go away. Atlassian's architecture has been tested and tried, and we take care of that for you. And that helps you accelerate your team's productivity, right? So all of those kind of come back to the architecture and the investments that we're making there. Leverage us.
Absolutely. Leverage the vendor. They're the experts. But you talked about opening ports, and as a CIO, that sends a shiver down my spine. So Paul, Rodney, maybe talk a little bit about how you maintain security and compliance in this world that's becoming increasingly risky and complex.
Yeah, I think, it's really important to echo what Dave was saying there, is that as Atlassian is investing in all of these security and compliance initiatives, we're doing the same as app vendors. So something that we've done at Appfire is introduced an idea of the Trust Center. So we have a Trust Center where you can go in, you can look at various apps, various tools, and ensure that they are compliant with whatever your compliance needs are. So for example, ISO, or it could be GDPR or HIPAA, whatever it might be. This sort of gives you that confidence that as you make that change, that move to cloud, that you're covered.
Yeah, and one of the things, from spending actually, a few years doing analyses for prepping for ground to cloud migrations, and basically just going, hey, is this even right for us? Compliance is always something that comes up. One of the things I always tell anybody I deal with, when I have those first meetings with you for assessment, I want somebody from your risk or infosec teams involved, because you don't want them involved when it's UAT and they kill the migration, right? Because all of a sudden they realize that the way like one of the apps that you're using doesn't actually meet the compliance needs. So, that goes into kind of a due diligence model where those teams on your side will need to reach out to the vendors for the third-party apps you actually want to use to see, hey, do they meet what our specific compliance profile is? Every organization, even if you're in the same vertical, is going to be different, right? Different financial companies, yeah, they may have some standards they follow, but they may have specific compliance needs for their own specific organization. You can contact each of the vendors and find out where they fall in. And the problem is from a vendor perspective, it can be hard to have every compliance checked off. You choose what our focused ones are. Like the thing I really like about Appfire's approach here is that you kind of have it more consolidated, where I can go, hey, across the apps, can I see all of the compliance, where I'm not having to chase down 10, 15 different apps. And then, okay, now I got to find an alternative because this one doesn't meet. And no, that one doesn't, and that one doesn't, and that one doesn't. Having a centralized place to actually get that information and have those discussions makes things better. That's been one of the boons with what Atlassian has done with surfacing their compliance information, right? It makes it to where there's not as much burden on you as somebody who's migrating to get that information. Your risk and infosec teams can have those discussions easier. And like I said, this is essential because I have seen migrations where you've hit UAT and the infosec teams risk hasn't been engaged enough. All of a sudden go, wait a second, we can't use X, Y, and Z. And I've seen it at the beginning go, we can't migrate yet because these tools do not meet our compliance needs. So that's the key part there is doing that due diligence up front from your side to actually check with the vendors. And, like I said, with Appfire's, Trust Center and with Atlassian's, basically trust model, those are really good. And, we're hoping that's the kind of the direction the environment goes, because that really helps grease the migrations.
Well, so what I'm hearing is the partners really matter. I hope everybody in the audience is hearing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Look, in 25 minutes, I hope we've convinced you that the cloud is now for Atlassian customers. I've been talking about it for years. IDC predicts cloud spending is going to eclipse on-prem spending this year. And I'll say this, Atlassian has been investing in the cloud for 2 years. By the time the EOL, the end of life date occurs, it'll be almost 4 years of investment. And so it's clear that Atlassian's commitment to the cloud is there and it's real. So let me turn it back to the expert panel. Dave, talk about Atlassian's focus on the cloud briefly.
Right. So as we continue to focus on the cloud, to bring it back to what I said at the top, it is where we're making our investments. Our best work is going from an innovation standpoint, right? You'll see it first in the cloud. Yes, we are still keeping data center and things like that spot on and making improvements that were needed, but investing fully into the cloud and really encourage you to get there as soon as is is possible in a safe manner.
Terrific. Rodney?
I think from my perspective, right, it's that ticking clock that we kind of touched on at the beginning. The longer you wait, the less time you're going to actually have to migrate. You're probably going to have to make some more difficult decisions on what you leave behind. You're going to have to accept the fact that, hey, yeah, we've identified this as a business critical item, but we don't have time to actually migrate this in a way that's going to work for us. Or the partners that we need to actually help us move, they're all booked up, or they have, we can't even start doing an assess for you for another 2 months. Right. So it's really that being conscious of, we need to go ahead and get that assessment in now and go ahead and lock in what our path is going to be for the migration. Because, additionally, and I've been focusing on kind of the external for your organization, you're going to probably internally have to go through procurement, funding, legal, right? All of those fun contractual things that we always deal with too after we figured out that we're going to move. So, there are so many moving parts that the longer you wait, the more of that 18 minus months starts to chip away.
Absolutely. And I think you brought us to the final point. How can partners help?
So the partner ecosystem, the way we really help, part of it is, this is where we live every day, right? It's kind of, that idea that, I'm going to go kind of with my plumbing analogy. You can actually go in and fix plumbing in your house yourself. You can watch some YouTube videos and try to do stuff. But, I've replaced sinks myself in tight spots. And, I've thought, hey, you know what? The amount of time I'm spending here is costing me more than it would have cost me to have actually paid somebody who actually knows how to do this and who knows other contractors as well if something goes wrong. Same thing in the migration space, right? These are the partners are the ones who live this day in, day out. We've got our strategies. We talk to each other. So we know what the complexity of the migrations, and also we've got the relationship with the vendors, like with Appfire, right? To actually help with that part of the migration whenever we run into issues, or whenever we just need to kind of find out, hey, is there something we should be watching out for because we're going to be migrating some of your apps as part of this client migration. So it's really that expertise that is being encapsulated and that ends up saving time and resources on your side to actually perform the migrations.
Absolutely. Paul, bring it home. We got a couple of seconds for you.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what Rodney said, is that if you don't want to do the plumbing yourself, you also don't want to have tools that are not made for the plumbing. And so a key element that Appfire does is to help create those tools that help you with that transition to cloud. So right tools can do a lot of that heavy lifting, can do the analysis, it can look at an inventory of your system, it can help you to understand what might go wrong as you do that migration, fix that beforehand so that as you move your data from one place to the other, it doesn't break. And so Appfire has tools like that. Atlassian has tools like that. They all have different places in their lane. We look at Appfire as where we focus on those larger migrations where there's a lot of complexity. Atlassian has tools, I think, for more of those simple migrations, but they all go together to help you to really make those migrations a success.
Right. So with this, I'll just say the cloud is now. There's a couple of resources I want to share with people. You don't have to write them down. They're available. You'll see them on the web. They'll be part of the recording. Let's keep going. We got time for questions. So I've got some questions that we got from people early in the presentation. Let me start asking the panel. The first one is, what exactly does server include? What do we mean when we say server? Dave, maybe you want to talk about that? What is the
We're all
server?
looking at each other. Yeah, so the server license, right? So it's essentially the download of the software, a server that lives behind your firewall, right? It really is like the simplest install of an Atlassian software product that you control, right? You own that server, you manage that server. It is behind your firewall, and it is that license, that software package that is built for the server that is being end of life.
Okay, so a similar question is, what about data center? You know, we've got server products, we got data center products. Are they moving to the cloud? What's happening with them?
So it really is to two different code bases, right? So the data center is another deployment method that that you have as an option for your Atlassian tool suite. Again, that is behind a firewall, whereas cloud is going to be hosted on Atlassian's cloud. We continue to make those investments into both. Now, we have talked about how we're investing heavily into the cloud, and that is true, but we're not leaving data center behind, where we're making sure it's brought up to par. If there are improvements that are very that are important for our customer base, right, to do their jobs better, to be able to perform and build their own software, we continue to invest there.
Well, that's terrific. So data center, as we said earlier, is a viable option for people who don't want to move to the cloud now. But I think we're all confident that at some point, Atlassian will help with that migration as well, and we'll be moving those products, but not quite yet, right?
Correct.
So here's a couple of questions I'm seeing now. So here's a good one. What percentage of migrations are taking the opportunity to rework their projects and workflows versus those that are doing a lift and shift? I want to answer the broad question, not particularly Atlassian products and what you all have seen, but I'll say that anytime you're going to completely change your products and rehang your software, please look at your workflows. I say to people all the time, automating bad stuff just gets bad stuff done faster. And a lot of times, decisions that were made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, don't apply to your business, but they're baked into your code. So in general, at the CIO level, at the board level, take every opportunity for a rehang or a re-architecture to start by thinking about your workflows and your processes, and only automate the ones that you want to carry forward. Now, let's let the experts answer what they've seen, particularly in Atlassian Cloud.
So let me go to this, and I'm not going to have a percentage of this. I'm just going to go with more behavioral, what I see happen in migrations. So, you know, and if I sound like a broken record, I apologize, but there are some very, you know, important key principles here. But, you know, like part of this depends on how long you're going to actually have for your migration. But this starts off during that assess phase. This is where I see this look, and you go, you know, and like, just because you do the assess, that doesn't mean you're actually starting the migration immediately after. And so what'll happen, what I see a lot of times is you'll identify at least a core set of workflows that may be overly complex, or that may want revision. Depending on the size of your instances, you know, you've got to make that decision. Are we going to have time to rework everything and work with all the business units to rebuild everything? But in general, what a lot of times you come out of that assessment phase with is these are some actual workflows that may be more complex that are needed, or that are no longer needed. And let's consolidate. You know, this was, you know, we've got 5-10 years of craft here, and we've just been using these same workflows. Let's actually replace these with something newer, more streamlined. And that's actually usually what we see is a streamlining and a standardization. You know, our HR team has 30 different workflows. Why are all these workflows? Well, HR might not be the best example because they have a lot of approvals and stuff in their workflows that may be very, very specific. But a lot of times you'll see it where you go, you know, why is there all this fracturing across the same business unit? For workflows? Let's see if we can do a consolidation. You know, one of the things that whenever we do assessments, we come out with is, here's a set of backlog items for the client to do. after the assessment and before we actually start the migration, here's some cleanup you can do. And a lot of times workflows will actually fall in there as, you've got workflows with 25, 30 steps in here. Really, you want to pare these down before you move. You want to talk to the business units. But like I said, it comes down, the balance you got to look at is how much time are we going to actually have to do the migrations as well? Because you can change those when you get over to the cloud, but it's also that same thing where, hey, I'm buying a new house and I'm going to paint the walls 2 months after I move in. You never do it. 4 years later, they're still the same white walls, right? So you've got to figure out where that balance lies for your organization on your need to get to the cloud in a specific time frame versus the amount of time it's going to get everybody that needs to be involved in those conversations for those. I would say, just tackle some key essential workflows from some of your more, more extensive Jira users, because you can usually your teams that use Jira to put it through its paces a lot more than other teams. And those are the ones you probably want to look at as kind of first candidates.
That's a terrific answer. Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Rodney says. There's like, as part of that assessment phase, you can figure out things that don't need. It's the opportunity to do a lot of house cleaning. Do I need to take all of my third-party apps across? Do I want to merge instances? So I mean, like, for example, some of the tools that we build at Appfire are very are purpose built with that in mind. Can we consolidate all of these different large instances? Do we have any M&A activity that resulted in multiple instances that we never did anything with? So we can put them all together. So it creates further efficiencies, not just in taking advantage of the cloud, but I think of really an opportunity to clean house and start fresh in a certain regard.
Well, there's a follow-on question that dovetails very well with what you two guys have said, and that's, what are your recommendations for the data, old projects that you don't want to take to the cloud? How do you archive?
So this actually ends up is a very common case, and part of this depends on what licensing you go with on the Atlassian side. Like if you go with the enterprise licensing, a lot of times what we do is go, hey, you know what, create an archive instance in there, move that data that's read only, right? It's there. It constantly exists. The key point here is, you've got this old data, figure out what you can leave behind, because that also is very important, because it makes the migrations go faster. They can end up being cleaner. But, it's that question, are we going to need this information for a compliance audit in 2 years? Or do we have a time where we can actually just dump data? Or do we have actually a time where we have to dump data? So, that's the first thing. Actually, I say that's the first thing you would consider is you figure out what is actually our corporate data retention policy. I know that, there's people that'll keep a read-only server instance around, using the perpetual license, because they know nobody's going to do anything in it. And, it's just this static thing that eventually everybody forgets is under Bob's desk, and, it just, it's just kind of there. If you're kind of in a premium license, then you need to decide, hey, maybe we have an instance that is our archive instance, and we only have a couple of users that can go into it. Maybe, somebody from a reporting team, an admin team. So it's a small 10 user instance or something. But, that's really what you consider there. Or you actually move, if you have either a small enough data set or you're comfortable with the migration times, you can move all of this into a single instance, and then, mark the projects as archive projects. Of course, then you also end up in that case where you may have custom fields you don't need, which ends up being a performance hit. You have more data than you need, and there's ways to have your filters that won't show that. But it's kind of figuring out, do we need that data commingled in an archive state? Can we put it in a different instance? Can we leave it behind under Bob's desk on his little Raspberry Pi server?
Well, I want to make two comments, again, general CIO comments. There's two rules that I've seen about data retention. Never delete anything before your retention threshold, and never keep anything beyond your retention threshold. Your legal, your compliance, your audit teams came up with these after a lot of thought and a lot of work at most companies. And it is very expensive to save data beyond the expiration threshold. There's a thing, at least in the United States, called the best evidence rule that says if you got 40 years worth of data and you get subpoenaed you get to provide 40 years worth of data because it's the best evidence. So be very thoughtful. And I think one of you said, Rodney, you might have said it, get your compliance people in the room early, just like you want to get your audit people in the room early, your security people. None of these migrations should happen in a vacuum with just IT people. It should be with the people who set the governance model for your company. And then obviously the tools need to be there so that companies can keep what they need and discard what they don't. And I think you answered that side of the question very well. Any other comments on this general topic? Because I'm hearing a lot of data questions. How about migration? How straightforward is it to move data from the current products to the new from the server products to the cloud products?
This is kind of the reason you want a solution partner. I'm going to say, theoretically, it's very easy. And you know, theory is great until you have to cash that check, right? And then, you know, then you realize, oh wait, I can't draw on that account because it doesn't work, right? It's definitely one of those things. You know, it's there. You know, Atlassian's got tools in place, and you know, like Appfire's got tools to help with migrations. And in some cases, you have stuff where it's just, you know, it's easier to do a point move, but there are a lot of moving parts. You know, how are you gonna reconcile or flatten your users? You've got third-party app data, but not all of that data moves across with JCMA, except we use JCMA as our tool. Or we have a super large instance, and this forces us into site import for the way we're going to move. Well, that affects everything else that's going to move. So, you know, like on paper and in theory, it's simple, but it's not. That's the not to be flippant on that answer, but it ends up being very complex to do the moves and to make sure everything goes across properly at the end of the day.
Like most answers in IT, it depends. Paul, you've done a lot of this. What's your take on this?
Yeah, and I really want to draw on what Rodney was saying there is at the end of the day, there's a lot of complexity. It seems simple, but it's not. And so, you know, at Appfire, we look to build tools that kind of simplify a lot of that complexity. And so if you think about all the data that you're bringing across, what kind of projects are you bringing across? Are there duplicate users? Are there custom fields? What do I want to do with those? And so there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to moving data from one place to the other. And so I think using a right solution partner, using the right tools that can help identify a lot of these problems up front, make mass changes if you need to, deal with custom fields, deal with workflows, all of those moving parts need to be considered. And so I think, again, lots of planning, lots of consideration, lots of testing, lots of training. Really, this is a very thoughtful process if you want to do it right. And so as you move to the cloud and don't want to have a sour taste as you get there, you need to really think about these things ahead of time.
Absolutely. So here's another question on the same topic, really. When migrating a Jira project, how long will the project not be accessible to the end user? I'm sure the answer is it depends, but maybe you could help put some guardrails around that. It depends.
You want to take that, Rodney? Or...
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, this is kind of what I end up in the guts with a lot of times. So yeah, I mean, Wayne is right. It's saying it depends. Basically, it's whatever you set for that migration window for the whole Jira instance, right? So you don't think of it as, when is a single project available or not available unless you're migrating one project, right? Like usually whenever we do migrations, we try, if we can, to get those completed in a 48-hour window, right? So that things are available. Basically, and I say 48 hours, but there's prep work that happens even, days before that where we're moving over data. But we try to get it to where we cut on a Friday. Hey, it's your end of business on Friday. We're putting everything into read-only mode, and then hopefully whenever everybody comes in Monday morning, we've already done all of our smoke testing and stuff over the weekend, and people are ready to go ahead and start creating issues. So that's what we try to hit, because that ends up being the least disruptive. But I think there's a migration I'm involved with right now, and it's look, given the migration strategy we're having to go with and the amount of data, we're looking at a 72-hour window, right? So that's 3 days, and that's the reality situation. That goes back to kind of the complexity of moving across projects as well. And so really it's, we try to keep it in as tight of a window as we can. And a lot of times there are things you can accomplish in a weekend. Although, the bigger and larger enterprise migrations, and as those get kind of more complex, if you're having to do a lot of merges and stuff, things may actually drag on a little bit longer, because then there's cleanup tasks that may have to happen on the back end of those types. If the difference between a merger and a lift and shift. So like I said, so it depends. Like I said, we try to hit a weekend if we can, but that's not a guarantee for that that's gonna be down. It depends on the complexity of the migration.
I spent 20 some odd years doing mainframe infrastructure work, and we always prayed, in one sense, for long weekends. 4th of July weekend, I always worked. Thanksgiving weekend. Of course, everybody in IT works over New Year's, depending on if you're closing books or not. So yeah, we all bet on long weekends and hope that we get through in that time. Seen it. Let's switch to another topic then. Here's a question that I like. We talked about it very briefly, but what kinds of things would make me migrate to data center from server rather than cloud? What are the kinds of things that might keep me from wanting to do cloud really quickly, or even by the end of life date?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, I think it depends. And I think for for organizations that have a lot of compliance and don't trust the cloud, or your CIO, CTO doesn't trust the cloud yet, there may be that requirement to keep it in your own data center or in your own private cloud. And so there may be compliance initiatives that really guide your decision. It can also be too, I mean, we talk about a lot of the advantages of moving to cloud now, is that sometimes the tools aren't quite there yet. So as I know at Appfire, as we're trying to move many of our apps to data center and cloud, often we're not quite there yet with the cloud, and a lot of the app vendors are that way. And it's the same way with Atlassian. They have an aggressive roadmap. Eventually, their plan is that they'll overtake the functionality in data center. But right now, often in data center, you have more rich functionality.
I 100% agree with that functionality bit, because a couple of years ago I did it. It was a grounded cloud analysis, and the client at the time decided to not go, and it was specifically for that. There was one third-party app that saved. It was a 90-minute meeting with 60 people involved once a week. They were able to cut that completely out, but the app didn't exist in the cloud. Well, that is, when you look at, license cost and everything involved, there's actually a lot of money being spent if you have to reintroduce that meeting. And so, that was now the tooling is there. So that's one of the great things we're seeing is, more and more of the tools showing up, like an Appfire moving as much as they can over to the cloud. That's awesome, because we're constantly saying, hey, this feature's here. Like two weeks ago, I didn't see this app available. Okay, now I can recommend this. So that is, that's kind of one of those really big things is the functionality there yet? It's not that it'll never be there. It's that is it available now? So that's one of the big ones that we see. The other one, talking about the compliance teams, that's an important we see too. And the other part we see around that is, companies that are already using a lot of SaaS products, they usually don't see as much of a barrier, because they're used to kind of dealing with those things, those tools that are, the running of them are out of their control. But we also see, the cases where there are on-prem servers and services that they either can't, or it ends up being time prohibitive to actually get the holes through the firewall for those apps. So you can write the integrations for the cloud to cut over, but if you can't actually get to the apps, we see that as an issue too.
Yeah, can I add, if you wouldn't mind, just add two quick things to springboard off of what was said. From a compliance standpoint, one of the biggest things that we see, right, as a barrier and that we run into is FedRAMP, right? So we are, just so you know, as Atlassian, we are very focused on on getting that FedRAMP certification. I don't know if that impacts anybody here on the call, but it is something to keep in mind. So to answer the question directly, right, the compliance, and that might be a specific one, know that it is on the roadmap. The other thing when it comes to apps that you might use in data center that aren't quite ready for the cloud, while we can and do help our customers, I'm sure the partners do this as well, find other suitable substitutions, one of the best ways to help and encourage an app vendor to get their data center or server app available in the cloud is for their customers, you, to talk to them. Let them know that you're interested in that. And that helps accelerate that process.
Mm-hmm. So I got another question, and this is, again, as a CIO, one that's very close to my heart. It says migrations are ugly. How do you best communicate to the end user to get their buy-in and to help them keep their patience through the journey?
So a couple of things
Early
here.
and often.
Yeah. Gonna hit back to the point of that assess phase. That's where you start to talk to those teams. You let them know this migration, it's coming. It's not a matter of, hey, we're gonna have to move somewhere. So they're gonna know that, there's a migration coming. And that way, usually if you make them part of that process, they feel more empowered there, and they feel their input is actually being considered, which is a very important feature, right? Because you don't want to, you're not moving in a vacuum. So I think that's one of the important things. Involve them in that assessment phase whenever you do that. And I had another part of the answer. Well, repeat the question again, Wayne, because I lost my second.
The question was, how do you get people, how do you get your end users enthusiastic through the entire cycle?
Okay. Second part here. Okay. Yeah. And so the second part here, develop a communication strategy early too. Whenever you come out of that assessment phase, here's a backlog item: communication strategy on where migrating. Start letting people know what will be changing for the cloud. And those are things that you'll be figuring out to a degree during that assessment, right? Is how are we going to be working differently when we get to the cloud versus where we're working now? So it is that constant engagement with your organization, constant communication with them to let them know what path you're on and where you're going to arrive.
Yeah, let me throw
Yeah,
my.
and
Sorry, Paul.
Go ahead. Yep.
You're the expert. I'll let you go first.
Oh, absolutely. I just want to really highly echo what Rodney says here. Having gone through some migrations recently, is really over communicate. As you make that switch, if somebody all of a sudden comes in and they're used to working in their Confluence data or Jira data, and all of a sudden my cheese has moved, things have moved somewhere else, make sure you communicate how it has changed. Where do you go now for your source of information? Where are your projects? Ensuring that communication is often provides, I guess, just a sense of confidence that we're doing the right thing and that I can continue to do my job in the same manner.
Yeah. And real quick, let me add a term: transformation. Right? It's more than just a technical migration. You are, if you're using, especially if you're using a lot of tools and it's really embedded in your business, you're making a cultural shift. You are transforming the way you're doing your business. You're not just, and it's not just technology. It's not just a migration, right? It is a change of business. So think of it as a transformation. That includes more, obviously, than just migration.
So now you got a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I define digital transformation as a rethinking of culture, markets, products, customer experience, and employee experience that is driven by the capabilities of technology or by somebody doing something with technology as a competitor. Obviously, that's not relevant here. But to your point, it's not about technology first. It's about what are we trying to accomplish as a department, as a team, as a group of users. What's the end state? And my comment was going to be early on, you got to put budget together for communication. Think of it as a marketing project. A lot of people think IT is just about doing it. It's about selling it. And if you're not marketing what IT is doing, even within your own team, you're going to lose people. And so I make it a point to have an explicit communication or even marketing communication line in the budget. Otherwise, it'll get overlooked. let's see, we're getting into here's a pretty specific question. How do the number of issues in a Jira instance impact the migration time needed? If you have 1 million issues, it's X number of hours. Is 2 million issues 50% more? Is there a rule of thumb or a guideline? Or I hate to say, does it depend?
So there's not really a rule of thumb on that, right? Because, it's not that we can go, hey, it's twice the issues, it's 50% more. Part of it depends on third-party app data that you're putting across. Part of it depends on what your actual migration strategy is. Like one of the things that we always do as part of our rehearsals is we like to get timings. And that's one of the things we've actually seen. There's a migration we did last year, and the strategy we were initially going to do with it, Atlassian made a change to some of their tooling that another strategy that actually provided for more complete migration without having to actually do as much post-processing actually became viable because the throughput doubled, right? So, it really depends on what you see in those rehearsals. Yeah, if you have 2 million issues, it's going to take longer than 1 million. And if you're pushing, those issues, it just depends. It depends on how you're moving the issues and what else is coming along. Also, like how much attachment data is there? How many users and groups do you have? Right? Those are all impactors. So there's not that actual gauge where you put a bunch of stuff into a calculator and it comes back out. Okay, here's how much time it's going to take. Like I said, usually it's something where as you work, we can give kind of ballparks on how okay, we think it's this t-shirt size, but really you get into those rehearsals and you actually start to see, nope, this is what this actually looks like.
Yeah, so again, a lot of it is what we keep talking about. You've got to get started, you've got to do your analysis, and you've got to do your practice migrations, right? You've got to be building your own timelines and then working with your users, your customers, to see how disruptive it'll be, how different it'll be, and then build your communication, your training, and your testing and migration strategies accordingly, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Definitely.
I think we've been through a lot of questions, and I want to remind everybody. I quickly went through a slide, and you've seen something in the comments about the Cloud Readiness Analyzer for Jira and about the Appfire migration tool. We've got links for both of them. They'll be in the material you get. I do want to do one more thing besides thanking the panel for their expertise and their time, is mention an upcoming webinar. We're doing 5 innovative asset management use cases every service management team should know. Whew, that's a mouthful. Register on the website. Again, the material is available. And I want to thank everybody for the time and effort you spent attending, and definitely want to welcome you to future webinars with this group. And I look forward to seeing everybody on my Cloud Wars work. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, panel. Talk to you again.
Thank you.